policy program at the London School of Economics. He has a stellar record in terms of educational qualification and published research. He ended his education with a DPhil in economics from Oxford University. And he has published on a whole range of topics, from natural disasters, mass media, rural financial intermediation, all the way to industrial policy, taxation, poverty, and growth. He has been a visiting assistant and associate professor of economics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, in the US, at Harvard University, the National Bureau of Economic Research, École Polytechnique, which is a top graduate school in France, and the University College London, as well as the University of California at Berkeley. He is co-director of the Development Economics Program at the Center for Economic Policy Research, a senior fellow of the Bureau of Economic Research in Economic Analysis of Development, but it's also known as BRAC, a faculty research fellow at the National Bureau of Economic Research, a fellow of the European Development Research Network, a member of the Institute of Policy Dialogue, and I can go on and on and on. He is also associate editor of the Economic Journal and is founder and director of the Microeconomics of Growth Research Network. I think I have said enough by way of introducing Professor Burgess. We now look forward to hearing him speak. So I shall hand over the floor to him. Thank you.
By just saying a couple of things, which is, firstly, it's great to be back in Bangladesh. I guess today, my typical talk is an hour and a half long and focuses on regressions and theory. And I do about 30 of those talks a year. Thankfully for you, today will not be that type of talk. The way I see the talk today is to give you a little bit of a picture of development economics, how it's evolved, but specifically how Bangladesh fits into that picture. I suppose my first sort of major point is that Bangladesh is a little bit of an unsung hero of development. I mean, we hear a great deal about social indicators, particularly on gender empowerment, but even on the economic front, in terms of economic growth, Bangladesh has done spectacularly well relative to its fairly recent history. So that's sort of point number one. Bangladesh is an unsung hero. The second point is that as Bangladesh evolves, as all countries evolve, they want more ideas. And what I'm mainly going to be talking about today is how development economics may provide some new ideas for Bangladesh, because I don't think you're at some sort of frontier of efficiency, either on the economic or the social front. But to do that, I'm going to step back into development economics. Hopefully we have some students of economics here who can take the research forward in the country. So the way I think about in terms of where I come from. So funnily enough, my first degree was actually in molecular biology. So I came to economics, as it were, after the first degree. I was actually brought up in East Africa and the Philippines. I'm not even really British. But in terms of my professional development as an economist, even before I did a PhD, I had the privilege of working with Manmohan Singh in India between 91 and 93. And that was pertinent to Bangladesh because at that point India was dropping tariffs. And when you drop tariffs, you're losing revenue, which the former chairman here will be aware of. So my job as a rather lowly research assistant to Nicholas Stern was to find out what would replace the tariffs in India. And so I worked a lot on indirect tax reform, particularly the development of VAT. And that brought me to something Jonathan was pointing out, which is the centrality of the development of a tax system for the development of a country. And it's not purely just because of the revenue, but because it changes the social contract. If you pay for your own development, then you're much more likely to care how that money is spent. And that's a theme which I'll come back to. In terms of BRAC and Bangladesh, BRAC was my entry point. So I had the pleasure of meeting in 2002 Mushtaq Chowdhury, and then when he became the director of BRAC Research, to begin some research on Bangladesh, which was starting around 2006, and that was on the ultra-poor graduation program. What's exciting about that is we actually have some results now, which I'll present in very brief form today. But even more exciting is I had the pleasure of being in Paris about a month ago with the chairman of BRAC, Sir Fazle Abed, actually showing what we had found in Bangladesh and seeing that idea being replicated across the world. Not necessarily by BRAC, but by a whole number of other implementing partners. So that's an idea of something coming out of Bangladesh and spreading across the world. So one of the central things I'm going to be coming back to again and again is Bangladesh has the capacity to generate new ideas that will have international resonance. And we'll be coming to some examples of that. So after I met Mushtaq Chowdhury, I also started working with Imran Matin, who's now moved on to Save the Children, and Mahbub Hussain, and lastly Rabea Yasmin. So I've had a long association with BRAC, which was before the IGC was even born. But when the IGC was born, we had the good sense to approach Wahid Mahmood to be the director, and it's been a very productive first 5 years of the program in Bangladesh. I've just started, in fact I've just come back from Pakistan and started working there. So what I will try to do from a somewhat limited knowledge is to point to some areas where I think there's some interesting ideas bubbling up, which may be of some relevance to Bangladesh. By no means am I going to tell you exactly what those ideas are, but I think I'll sketch out some areas where I think that there is scope for interesting research. Okay, so coming back to what is development. So let's forget about Bangladesh for a few minutes and say what is development. I mean, the way I think about it is fairly simple. It's about increasing the productivity of firms and households. And what that then implies is that there's some form of structural change, so people move out of risky, unproductive activities and into more regular productive activities. That's basically development for me. You can see that not just in economic terms, you can see that as social empowerment. Those two things tend to go hand in hand. So what that means is we want to shift people out of basic agriculture, certainly in the Bangladeshi case, but globally, into manufacturing and services. So we're fundamentally interested in diversification, we're interested in agglomeration, people coming together to work together, and in effect creating thickets of economic activity of different forms. They could be in services, they could be in manufacturing. So today, as I say, I don't want to just speak about Bangladesh, partly because I'm not the world's expert on the country. So what I'd like to do is to reflect a little bit on how development economics has changed over the last 20 years, and then distill from that discussion some lessons for where future economic growth might come from in Bangladesh. So what is the question of what is development about? As I said, for me, it's about increasing productivity, And what's interesting is when you begin to think about that a little bit more, and you begin to think about Bangladesh, there's sort of two bits. There's the kind of from the bottom. So for example, how do you tackle extreme poverty? I think that Wahid said there is a chance that in a country like Bangladesh, with the growth rates that are being achieved, that you can begin to have some chance of eliminating extreme poverty. As I'll point out today, you can't just rely on growth. You actually have to do some concrete things to empower people at the bottom, and in effect to allow them themselves to get out of poverty. So the second bit, which is sort of from the top, is industrial development, writ large. That you just simply cannot have millions and millions of people moving out of poverty and into respectable standards of living without industrial development. So I'll speak a little bit about what are the factors that are important. But clearly both these sets of helping people at the bottom and pulling people up by industrial development are both relevant within Bangladesh. I think the final factor, which is also relevant in Bangladesh, is the cost of growth. So the cost of growth, we were discussing just before the lecture, you know, the problem with brick kilns and pollution and so forth. There's that kind of local pollution cost, but there's also the cost that comes, for example, from rising temperatures and in the case of Bangladesh, rising sea levels, which are threatening. So I'll finish the lecture discussing the fact that when we think about growth, we also have to think about the cost of growth, and that is something which is relevant in particular in a very low-lying, densely populated country like Bangladesh. So let's just talk about how development has changed, development economics has changed in the last 20 years. And I'll be brief here, but I think it's really, really important because it's unrecognizable from where it was 20 years ago. So today at the LSE, apparently, more than half the PhD students that come to the LSE wish to do development. When I was a graduate student, that was something closer to about 3%. And I think that reflects two things. One is obviously that a lot more of the economic activity in the world is going on in developing countries, but also the type of work that development economists do is so much more interesting. And I think the first reason for that is that data has changed dramatically. And one of the things we've tried to do in Bangladesh with some success is to build up data sets. So we're not just talking about macroeconomic data, we're talking about firm level data, we're talking about household level data, we're talking about surveys. And what's really incredible about data is it allows you to look at mechanisms, the mechanisms of development in a way that was just completely impossible 20 years ago. In particular, what has really changed, say, in the last 5 years is we're getting so much more data on production. So data on firms at all levels, both very small firms to big firms. So we're beginning to look at that process of structural change in detail and what drives that process. The second thing that's changed a lot is the world. So it is kind of incredible if you start to reflect on that you've had China coming out into a market economy, you've had India sort of ending its period of regulation, even before that Bangladesh was deregulating. So this type of variation is fascinating to economists because you can begin to look at institutional changes, you can look at liberalisation, you can look at different ways in which the state functions and how economic growth is affected when that changes. And it's basically been a period of a sort of golden period for the study of how institutions function and how that affects economic growth. The net effect, very best economists to work on development. So today, it's fair to say that development economics within economics is probably the most vibrant part of the whole economics field. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's not just, there's been a lot of change, and that change is very interesting. And we have the data to study it, which we certainly didn't when I was a graduate student. The other thing that's important, again, this feeds back to data, is that you've got lots of variation within countries. So I basically made my career, and I'll show you a couple of examples of this, studying what happened in different states of India relative to other states. Land reform, labor regulations, delicensing. So different states were doing different things, and then you could study, when they did those different things, what was the effect, say, on manufacturing output in the registered manufacturing sector and the unregistered manufacturing sector. What was the effects on growth, because you had the NSS to measure expenditures. What was the effect on GDP of the states? And that was something which was sort of not done. And again, it comes back to the fact that we managed to, with great effort, to pull together data sets that allowed us to do that. So in effect, what you can look at is two things. One is differing performance, and the second thing is, for example, if you build infrastructure, then that infrastructure may have differential effects on different parts of the country. The fourth area, which is comes back to the whole question of governance, is the growth of political economy. So I think, broadly put, if you go back to the 60s and 70s, planning models had a great deal of sway. We tended to think of countries as being run by leaders that optimize the welfare of their citizens.